I wish I could start this talk with something like, I am standing before you today to talk about a very important issue. But as you can see, I am sitting. Sitting in this, quite fancy I must admit, chair. I wish I could stand for the 15 or so minutes that you're expected to listen to me. But what I want to speak about today is too important to be cut down to just an introduction because I faint or dislocate a joint in the first 5 minutes. I want to give you the full picture. The full picture of what it's like to be disabled in a time when there is a global climate emergency requiring such rapid action that I and the other billion disabled people on this planet are left behind. On February 28 this year, the United Nations Organ on Climate Research, IPCC, released a new report. Climate Change 2022: Impacts, Adaptation and Vulnerability. This report makes it clear that continuing on our current path will end in consequences far beyond our ability to adapt to them. It's safe to say that we need to divert from this path, and we need to do it fast. But any situation requiring rapid action can lead to poorly thought through decisions. Decisions made without the inclusion of everyone they will affect. Decisions that risk leaving entire groups of people behind. Like so many others when talking about how to combat climate change, when I became a climate activist at the age of 14, I started preaching about cutting out meat and banning single-use plastic straws and how flying is the worst thing you can do. I didn't see anything wrong with it at the time. Everyone has to go vegan and stop flying, and haven't you seen the pictures of the turtle with a straw sticking out of its nose? It took me until being diagnosed with autism and a genetic lifelong chronic illness, both around the time of my 18th birthday, to understand the harm I was doing to the disabled community by saying these things. I was practicing something called eco-ableism. Eco-ableism refers to the direct or indirect, structural or individual discrimination against disabled people in the name of climate activism. It can take on many forms, ranging from more subtle things like saying everyone can go vegan, to blatantly promoting genocide by saying that the overrepresentation of disabled people in the mortality rates of natural disasters is just an example of natural selection. Starting with the seemingly innocent claim that everyone can go vegan, well, it's simply not the case. Being vegan myself, I'm aware of how privileged I am to be able to follow this lifestyle. There are times, though, when my disabilities make it quite difficult, and it usually boils down to 4 reasons: allergies, sensory issues, financial vulnerability, and low capacity. Firstly, I have numerous food intolerances, too many to count, and that makes it really tricky to find food that I can eat, even if I look at everything in the supermarket. Secondly, my autism makes me highly sensitive to stimuli, particularly textures. This means that some foods, like aubergine and vegan sausages, make me gag if I put them in my mouth. Thirdly, vegan substitutes for animal products tend to be more expensive than their non-vegan counterparts. Money is an issue for many people, especially broke students like me, but it's an even bigger one for disabled people because we are forced into poverty. I'm talking $1,000 monthly medical bills, medication that costs an arm and a leg, unexpected expenses for emergency surgeries and hospital stays, mobility aids that can round up to tens of thousands of dollars. The disability benefits we get, if we're lucky enough to get them in the first place, cover a mere fraction of this. Money also comes into play. Now you may think, that sucks, and frankly, I couldn't agree with you more, but then a light bulb goes off inside your head and you say, but wait a minute, you can still be vegan, just buy dried legumes in bulk, that costs almost nothing. And that's a great solution, I say, if you have the time and energy to soak beans 12 hours in advance and cook all your meals from scratch. A lot of us disabled people don't. Endless doctor's appointments, hospital visits for treatment or admission, battling insurance companies on the phone for hours. It's all a constant fight just to stay alive and have a shot at a decent life. And in a society as inaccessible as ours, it makes it all the more draining. So food that is pre-prepared can sometimes be our only option. And this is very difficult to find vegan, especially if you also have food allergies or are on a low budget. Money also comes into play in the single-use versus reusable debate. Reusable products tend to have a high initial cost, which many disabled people cannot afford because we're often living paycheck to paycheck. Some of the products can also be impossible to use, as can be the case with menstrual cups if you have mobility issues, for example. Independence is another major factor in this debate. Besides being more hygienic and lowering the risk of infection, single-use items are disposable, which keeps us from having to put unnecessary amounts of time and energy into cleaning them. Time and energy that might be just what we need to wash our hair that week. Tableware is something that a lot of disabled people substitute into single-use options. I personally use paper plates sometimes because my wrists go out of place when I do the dishes. Inconvenient, I know. And a straw helped me drink when I was quite ill with COVID and couldn't lift a glass. Single-use plastic straws are bendable, so I could drink whilst lying down. They pose a low risk of harm to the user, they don't disintegrate after a while, and they're affordable. So banning plastic straws, like some countries have, when they only constitute 0.025% of the plastic winding up in our oceans every year, is an unreasonable and harmful action, considering the number of people who need them on a daily basis. It should never be allowed to compromise on people's lives for the sake of environmentalism. The same goes for needing to fly or use a private car rather than going by public transport. Now, I don't go on yearly holidays to the other side of the world, but there have been times when I have needed to fly because other methods of traveling have simply been inaccessible. And as an autistic person who doesn't yet have a driving license, I would say I'm in a pretty intimate love-hate relationship with public transport. On one hand, I love the ability to get places by myself and not have to have someone drive me. On the other hand, it can take me hours to figure out how to get from one place to another, and having to deal with last-minute changes is extremely difficult for someone who relies on routine and things going exactly according to plan. Add in the overstimulation from bright lights, screeching train noises, and crowds of stressed-out people bumping into you on their way to work, and I can go into a state of complete shutdown. You can try to talk to me all you wish, but once I have shut down, I will just sit there, staring into space, feeling like I am on fire on the inside while simultaneously being dipped into a hole in the ice. And when I happen to have a migraine on top of things, add even more light and sound sensitivity and excruciating pain, well, there is just no way I could go anywhere by public transport. So when you shame us for flying or for going by car to the supermarket or heck, the movies, you are stripping us of our ability to be independent. We shouldn't have to be confined to a life within four walls just because we have a different way of living it. You cannot demand that we lower our quality of life even further when we are already more affected by the impacts of climate change. It's not like we can just stop using life-saving and life-improving products and services just because world leaders refuse to take the action needed, or because large-scale corporations want to continue making money and the only way of doing so in today's society involves emitting greenhouse gases. Moral of the story. Until equivalent alternatives to single-use products or environmentally unfriendly services are created and made equally available and affordable, stop putting the blame on disabled people for using the things we need to live. My friend and fellow disabled climate activist once said that sustainability isn't sustainable if it only works for the privileged. And this is the sentiment that we need the general climate movement to understand. Some seem to think that in order to be able to call yourself an activist, you have to be perfect. In essence, this means you have to live zero waste and have no greenhouse gas emissions. This has led to disabled activists being called hypocritical for not having those privileges, for advocating for climate action without, for instance, being vegan and going to protests. But placing the blame on individuals rather than acknowledging that the system is flawed is not activism. it is ignorance, it is anarchy. It's the anarchy that erupts when you omit a vital perspective from a process of change, when the urgency of action is deemed to override the worth of said perspective. And as the urgency of action grows bigger and bigger, well, so too does the need for compromise. At a certain point, we start compromising on people's human rights. This is when we hit the promotion of genocide. And this is what I was indirectly doing when I was telling everyone that there are no excuses for not going vegan, for not banning single-use plastics, and for not refraining from flying. Because what I was actually saying by this was, disabled people don't deserve to live if they can't adapt. We are already facing some of the worst consequences of the lack of adaptation. With the climate crisis leaving its mark all around the globe, we are seeing example upon example of how the disabled population is markedly more vulnerable. In the earthquake and subsequent tsunami in Japan in 2011, disabled people were twice as likely to die or be injured. This is because we lose life-saving medical equipment, mobility aids, and medication in the disaster or evacuation that follows, and are unable to obtain the medical care necessary in shelters. We even risk not being rescued. During the 2021 floods in Europe, 12 disabled people drowned in a care facility in Sinzig, Germany, because they were unable to evacuate in time. We are left behind, over and over. And yet you have the cheek to say that we deserve it? That it's just another step in the evolution of the human species? The only reason humanity has survived until today is that we have seen the sheer importance and utmost necessity of not leaving anyone behind. Not like we did Israeli Minister Karine El-Harar, who was initially unable to attend COP26 in Glasgow last year because it wasn't wheelchair accessible. We cannot afford to lose out on the disability perspective like this, especially not when the effects of climate change itself leave more people disabled. On a societal scale, we must make climate activism and climate action accessible. We must ensure the safety of disabled people in case of disaster, and we must amplify disabled voices in environmental contexts. So, how can this look in practice? Start by making documents and policies available in accessible formats, such as Braille or easy to read. We can't take part in any decision-making or let you know what we need if we don't have a way of understanding the information presented to us. Make individual environmental actions accessible. For instance, how are we supposed to recycle if we can't even reach the holes in the bins at the recycling stations because we happen to be wheelchair users? Revise your disaster management plan. Go over every little word and make sure that there are detailed policies and actual systems in place that enable proper evacuation and post-disaster care of the disabled people in your community. Set aside resources and funding dedicated to bringing in disability rights organizations and individuals to educate policymakers and people in power on how disabled people are affected by the matter discussed. Finally, include disability in reports and studies about the impacts of the climate crisis. The world needs to know that we exist and that we are amongst the most affected. Structural democratic changes like these are vital to the solution to the climate crisis. But they will not happen unless enough people push for them. And how are us disabled people supposed to awaken that fighting spirit within a wider population if even our own fellow climate activists refuse to listen? Because by failing to recognize the innate privilege that comes with being able-bodied, and by calling disabled people fake activists for not having those privileges, much of today's climate activism fosters a palpable feeling of exclusion that permeates the entire movement. We cannot afford this. We need you to include us, because we have been forgotten, neglected, excluded for far too long. Humans did not evolve by pushing each other away. We stick together. We are herd animals by blood. It's time we start acting like it. Thank you.